On this episode of Project Hemi Mag, we track down the cause of our misfire. Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project Hemi Mag. On this episode, we are going to continue to dig into this car. We need to find the cause of Cylinder 5's misfire, and I've got some ideas. So let's pull it apart because that's the only way to confirm and find out what is causing this misfire that's been going on way too long. Let's get to it.
Before I remove a major component of the vehicle, I like to unhook all the weird out of the way things first so I don't get caught up on them. And trust me, many times I've tried to remove an intake manifold or something of the like and definitely found myself caught on something. So let me show you some things you want to remove before you pull this intake manifold. Obviously we haven't even started doing any of the bolts yet, but I just like to get this out of the way. If you look back here, right where that flashlight is back in there, you can see right there, there's a grounding, should have two wires grounded to it. So make sure you disconnect those. Those will hold on pretty tight if you try to lift it. Also, you're gonna deal with the fuel rail. You get the fuel rail on both sides. Now, if you follow this one line down here, where I'm shining the light, you will see a disconnect back here. There we are. So that's the guy right there. You're gonna wanna use a fuel line disconnect tool and pop that off. That should disconnect both fuel rails. That way you can lift the intake manifold right off. And pretty much you're gonna wanna get one of these, like the little plastic fuel line removal tool. I don't know if this is gonna be the exact size, we'll have to try. I have a variety pack, so we'll try this blue one first. And you slide that on, they're a pain in the butt. You kind of pry it off, and that should pop the line off. After that, we'll do all the bolts and should be able to lift this off, maybe a few other connections. Obviously the fuel injectors on passenger side, PCV hoses should be fine, connected to the intake manifold. So we'll see what else there is, but it all should lift off as one unit. Just wanted to show you those tricky, kind of out of sight things you want to disconnect before you try to lift it off. Let's get this thing off the car. All right, let's try to reach that stuff in the back first. Put some safety goggles on just in case. Huh. Okay, well that worked. Some fuel will pour out, don't be too shocked. Now you want to depressurize your system before you do that, folks. Groovy. So this has a line that runs off the back of this fuel rail. And it should go, if I'm feeling this correctly, straight into this fuel rail right here. So it should come off as one unit. Boy, gasoline smells good. Those fuel line connectors are always a little pain in the butt. Just a heads up, it looks like a vacuum line, pretty big vacuum hose. Let's pull the connector and then pop that hose off. There we go. Oh boy. Do a last check, make sure we disconnected everything. Intake manifold should be coming right off. Well, I guarantee that plug is connected to something. Well, that works. It's ready for this. There we go. Oh boy, it's heavier than it should be. If you look down, these runners are kind of gnarly. Probably could use a cleanup too, wire brushing it. Would like to get some Hemi orange paint and repaint that. I think that would come out pretty nice. For this next part, you're definitely want to get the Magnum up off the ground, because we're going to pull the upper part of the exhaust system off from the headers down to the catalytic converter. So get it nice and high so you can squeeze under there, and we're basically going to unbolt the head, pull that up with the exhaust manifold connected. Underneath the Magnum now you can see the O2 sensors, pretty new catalytic converters, And this is where we're going to disconnect these bolts right here. Pretty long bolts on either side. We're going to disconnect those and lift the whole header assembly up with the engine. So that's probably the best way to do this. That way you don't have to mess with those exhaust manifold bolts. Yeah, before you can pull that head off, you actually have to take off power steering pump right here. Should be 10mm bolts. I think I see 1, 2, 3 of them. That wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, but you basically just stick a 3/8 inch ratchet down there, put it in the tensioner, and then you have to use basically a breaker bar or something to go clockwise to release the tension, and then you can loosen it all the way and you'll get your belt off that way. This guy should be pretty loose right now. Getting there, yep. Just undo these last bolts. There we go. You kind of just set this aside for now. You don't need to actually pull it out too much further. I reckon we don't want this whole tube coming up. It's probably some emissions tube. So there's a little bracket back here too. We probably want to remove that. Looks like it's got its own little nut right there. Let's actually pull these intake manifold gaskets off. No sense in having them be loosey-goosey. We can leave that one on for now. Actually doesn't look to be in too bad a shape. Nice and dirty. Okay, before we take the head off, we got to take off the rocker arm assemblies. You got your intake side, your exhaust side. What I recommend is when you remove this, is you lay it out on a piece of cardboard or a workbench or something. So I always set it up just like it's in the car. It's going to be the same when you want to remove the push rods from each side, whether it be the intake or exhaust side. And that just really helps with reassembly. So go ahead, pull this out, keep track of where everything's coming out from, and lay it out just as it is in the car. Just keep the same orientation. I like to start from the inside, work my way back, and then we'll get to those head bolts, remove the head. These are 10mm bolts. They're on there pretty good, not too hard though. Now it's time to get these head bolts out. Now they're torqued on there pretty good, so you're going to need some force. I don't recommend using an impact or an electric impact at first. I prefer to break everything loose with hand tools. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch breaker bar, see if that gets the job done. I don't think these have ever been off the car. Nearly 140,000 miles. They're probably going to be on there pretty good. You're going to start in the middle and kind of work your way out. There's 10 of these head bolts, and then we'll get these external bolts after. You cannot reuse these. These will stretch over the life of the car. You do not want to try putting these ones back in. It will not be a good fitment. Buy new head bolts. That's all I'm going to say there. Okay, time to hit these 10mm bolts up here, and that should be the last thing we need to remove to pull the head. Let's get it. Something you're going to want to do too, before you try to pull the head off, is just lift it a little bit, and that way you'll get all the coolant to start draining out. If you haven't drained your coolant system yet, like a smart person, go ahead and do that at this time. That'll let that coolant get out of here so you don't have a crazy mess when you're trying to lift this out of here. So go ahead and let that continue draining, and then we're going to go ahead and lift it. And like I said, it's going to be a pretty tight squeeze here. We do have these AC lines coming through right here. So all right, our plan of attack. Not saying it's a good one, but it's a plan. We're going to pull the head this way as much as we can, and then kind of pull it back over the center mass of the engine. That way we can kind of snake the exhaust headers up, And then obviously we're going to come this way with it too, because the header's obviously curved to the rear of the vehicle. There goes nothing. That is far heavier than I thought it was going to be. Oh boy. Just an awkward angle. And now we'll start inspecting all this. Let's pull the head gasket off, and then I kind of want to show you the condition. See what we're seeing around the pistons here. It's on there pretty good. Like I said, it wasn't leaking before, obviously. Probably just do another OEM one. These things tend to work pretty good. Really held up well for the stock head gasket. That's really cool. Well, some good news. All of the pistons actually look great. Not chunked up. There's no metal or weird debris down in there. This would be the guy. This would be cylinder number 5. And it looks fine. All the wear is pretty common across each of them. So definitely could use a cleanup. I'm not going to say that they don't need a cleanup. But man, for pistons with 140K on them, I am not seeing an issue here. So that's fantastic. Same deal. Come around here to the head itself. Driver's side head that we removed. We already know everything on that side looks good. Let's pop it up. It's actually quite a bit heavier than one would think, and that's partially because the headers are still on there. We have our intake and exhaust valves for each cylinder. Again, you can see the spark plug still in there. Look pretty awesome. Nothing's upset, no chunks of metal. All the wear and carbon deposits look exactly the same. Boy, this is no cause for alarm yet, for sure. Everything looks exactly what you'd expect. And for 140K, really not that bad of depositing on the intake valves, which appear to be way dirtier than the exhaust valves. So, and here's number 5 again, right here. This would be our 5th cylinder. Nothing to be concerned about. So from a head standpoint, nothing to do with the head, it's fine. Let's go ahead, check our lifters. Okay, to remove the lifters, we're on the back part of the engine here. Driver's side, here's cylinder 5. So we need to remove this whole assembly. There is one little bolt in the middle, you need to remove that. And then this whole assembly comes out as one piece with all 4 lifters. So let's go ahead and take care of that this time. Not one of the easiest things to film. It is an 8mm, just go ahead and I actually used, pretty loose now. I used just a 1/4-inch driver. Hardly get to use these with an extended 8-inch socket. So really good for that job. It's not really torqued down too hard. So now you can see the whole assembly is pretty loose. There's a lot of play in it. So we should be able to pull it all out with all the lifters. Some of the lifters were retained. So here we go, we'll just fish those out. And these are the 2 I want to look at. So these are the roller lifters from the 6.1 liter Hemi. These were both for cylinder 5, 2 per cylinder. As you can see, this is the rear one. Nice and shiny, nice and clean, spins very freely. Now these are contacting the lobes on the cam, if you're not familiar with how that works. Cam spins, lobe hits this, rubs this, these drive the push rods. That one looks great. Now we're going to look at this front one for a moment. And you can see it is pitted up. I don't know what's happening. It's like it might have seized at one point. You can see some flat spots on there. But the big thing is, can you see all the pitting? I don't know how well this is coming through on video, but there's just tons of pitting in the face there. It spins decently. There's a little catch here and there. Not as freely as it should. But boy, that pitting is kind of scary. That means that probably the cam is a little roughed up. Now, it would be super easy just to replace this lifter and just say, oh, I hope that fixes it. But you don't know, if the cam is damaged, it'll never quite run right. So, boy, that is severely pitted in some spots. You can see some chunks or some flat spots. I think this thing locked up at one point. So I've seen these ground down to nothing. Yeah, that is not a pretty looking lifter. So, we can see what we're gonna do next. Next time, we're gonna take a look at that cam.